أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله والصلاة والسلام على إمام القبلتين ونبي الحرمين وأفضل الثقلين وجد الحسن والحسين الذي سمي في السماء بأحمد وفي الأرض بأبي القاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين الصادقين والذين ذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا. اللهم صل وسلم وزد وبارك على صاحب الدعوة النبوية والسولة الحيدرية والإسمة الفاطمية والحلم الحسنية والشجاعة الحسينية والعبادة السجادية والمآثر الباقرية والآثار الجعفرية والعلوم الكاذمية والحجج الرضوية والجود الثقفية والنقاوة النقبية والهيبة العسكرية والغيبة الإلهية. اللهم عجل فرجه وسهل مخرجه. أما بعد فقد قال الله في كتابه الكريم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الذين يذكرون الله قياما وقعودا وعلى جنوبهم ويتفكرون في خلق السماوات والأرض ربنا ما خلقت هذا باطلا سبحانك فقنا عذاب النار. صدق الله العلي العظيم. For the love of Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam, sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. For the love of Fatimatul Zahra in particular, a second salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. To give our condolences to the Imam of our time upon these days when we commemorate the martyrdom of his grandfather Hussein, a louder salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Indeed, the intellect or the aql is the faculty which differentiates man from every other creation. Because this is that faculty which allows us to use what we know to come to various different conclusions that we did not have before. And in this regard, this ability is something which is unique to the human being and is a defining point of the essence of a human being. That's why when you examine the Quran and you examine the Hadith literature, there is an immense status and position which has been given to the aql or the intellect. For example, there is a tradition from the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam, where the Prophet Muhammad says, "Awwalu ma khalaq Allahul aql," that the first creation which Allah He created was the aql or the intellect. Or for example, you'll have another tradition from Ahlul Bayt that states that the Anbiya and the prophets are the outward messengers. But the aql and that intellect which is within you is your inward messenger. Or you'll have another tradition that Allah He says, "Lamma khalaq Allahu al-aql istantaqahu," that when Allah created the intellect, He gave it the ability to speak. And He said to it, فَأَقْبِلْ He said to it, أَقْبِلْ فَأَقْبَلَ He said to it, move forward, the aql move forward. And then He said to the intellect, أَدْبِرْ فَأَدْبَرَ He said for it to move back, and the intellect moved back. And then Allah says, وَإِزَّتِي وَجَلَالِي مَا خَلَقْتُ خَلْقًا أَحَبُّ إِلَيَّ مِنْكَ that by my might and my honor, I have not created a creation who is more beloved to me than you, the intellect. and it is only you that I command, and it is only you that I prohibit, and it is only through you that I give reward and the ajr, and it is only through you that I bestow my punishment. You see, on one side, when we examine all of these narrations, they go to demonstrate that the intellect is the gift of God to mankind. And it is through this intellect that you are able to transcend the different realms of reality. But on the other side, despite having all of these different traditions which praise the intellect and the position of intellect, when we look at Islamic history and the modern world, the debate as to what is the extent and the limit of intellect has been a common debate. For example, many people in today's world, they ask that when we look at many of the laws of Islam, many of these laws applied better to a society 1400 years ago. But when we live today in a society which is developed, which has advanced, the question is that do these laws, they apply today? This is one example. Another example is that can we use the intellect to understand Allah? For example, when we look at Islamic history, there was one group known as the Ash'aris. The Ash'aris, they said that if Allah wants to take shaitan into paradise, no problem. And if Allah wants to place, for example, the Prophet Muhammad into the fire of hell, no problem. Because at the end of the day, it is Allah's power. Allah does what He wishes. And whatever He does is good, and we are not to question Him. You see, this was one group. Another group, such as the Mu'tazila, said no. They said that an individual, through their rationale, can understand what is good, and they can understand what is evil. And it is through the intellect that many of the realities of the deen and the religion are understood. But when we come to the school of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, amongst all of these different debates in theology, for example, about the role of the intellect, for example, or about the role of the intellect in Islamic law, for example, you find that the school of Ahlul Bayt has often presented a balanced approach. And this is why in tonight's discussion, we'll examine the role of the aql, or the role of the intellect in the life of a human being. And we'll do it in the following stages. Number one, we'll examine that what is the Islamic perspective on the debate between religion and science. Number two, we'll examine the role of intellect in the realm of belief and aqaid. Number three, we'll examine the role of intellect in Islamic law. And number four, we'll examine the role of intellect in constructing a human society. And in that way, we can come to a proper understanding as to what role does this faculty, which has been called the first creation of God, serve within our lives. Now, when we begin this discussion, I chose to begin this discussion in a little bit more of a contemporary manner. Because we find this discussion about the role of religion in science and the role of science in religion is another use of the terminology for the role of intellect in the deen as well. You see, when it comes to this discussion of religion and science, you find that there are two polar opposites. One polar opposite said that science has no role in the religion. And this was a reactionary school of thought because they saw that there were a group of individuals who would say that religion only fills the gaps of your knowledge, that science is able to understand everything, and religion just comes in and it fills those gaps. So to reply to these individuals, we find one group of individuals went to the extreme of saying, no, religion has its domain, science has its domain, and there is no interaction between the two. But then there was a second group. That second group, they took their begging bowls and they sat in front of modern science. In other words, if there is a hadith of the Prophet Muhammad, they would say that what does modern science say about it? When there is the concept of wudu, they would say that what does modern science say about wudu? In other words, they would seek to establish everything from the deen from modern science. You know, I remember Muhammad Abdo was a famous scholar in Egypt in the 20th century. Muhammad Abdo spearheaded a movement, and in this movement, they began to realize that the Muslim countries are backwards in comparison to the Western lands. And they thought that the source of our backwardness is that we have not understood the modern sciences. So in that time, there was a movement that everything in the Quran should be interpreted in the light of modern science. So Muhammad Abdo, when you look at the verses of Surah Al-Fil, which present the story that when Abraha brings his army to destroy the Kaaba, and the grandfather of the Prophet Muhammad, he goes to Abraha and he says, "Oh Abraha, that you in the process of coming to the Kaaba have taken my camels." Abraha says, "You're a strange individual." Abdul Muttalib says, "What do you mean?" Abraha says, "I am about to destroy your house of worship, and you are worried about your camels that were taken in the journey?" Abdul Muttalib, he says, is that these camels are my responsibility. But this house also has an owner, and the owner of this house will protect that house. So the Quran, it says, تَرْمِيهِمْ بِهِجَارَةٍ مِّن سِجِّيلٍ, that a group of birds, they would come, and they would pelt the army of Abraha with the various stones, and they would be destroyed. You know, Muhammad Abdo, when he interpreted this verse, he said that these stones, they represent smallpox. Smallpox in what sense? That in the sense that even if there is a mu'jiza and a miracle, it has to be in line with modern science for it to have any validity. You see, this school of thought is highly problematic because when the Quran it speaks at the apparent level. That if I said to you a book is in front of me, you'll understand that there is a book in front of me. And in the same way, the Prophet Muhammad is speaking in the Quran. So you find these interpretations, they began to come forth in the past 2-3 centuries. Because these group of individuals, they sought to understand everything through the realm of aql and through the realm of intellect. Now, if we as Muslims are going to understand that what is the limit and the extent of aql and intellect in our life, then we have to see in which domain does the Quran say, "O mankind, use your aql." Because there are several verses of the Quran that say that, "O mankind, why do you not ponder? Why do you not reflect? Why do you not use your aql?" You know, when you look at the ayat of the Quran, what the ayat of the Quran they do is that wherever it tells mankind to use their intellect, it is in relation to those signs which take a person towards Allah. For example, the verse that I recited at the beginning of this majlis. Within that verse, Allah, He says that there are a group of individuals, الَّذِينَ يَذْكُرُونَ اللَّهَ قِيَامًا وَقُعُودًا وَعَلَى جُنُوبِهِمْ. That this group of people, they remember Allah when they're sitting, when they're standing, even when they're laying upon their sides, they remember Allah. And as they remember Allah, وَيَتَفَكَّرُونَ فِي خَلْقِ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. They reflect upon the creation of the heavens and the earth, and they say, رَبَّنَا مَا خَلَقْتَ هَذَا بَاطِلًا, that you have not created all of this in vain. Subhanaka, you are free from defects. And in that regard, we find that this verse is showing that when the Quran tells mankind to reflect, it is in relation to the system of the natural world. It is in relation to those ayat which are external and which are within you. It is in relation to the verses of the Quran. In other words, the Quran is saying that use your aql to come to the point of tawheed, to come to the door of Rasulullah, to come to the door of wilayah. But at a certain point, a person needs to build the spirit of submission. That there is a certain point that it comes that a person puts his aql in sajda, and he realizes in front of wahi and revelation, my aql and my intellect is nothing. That is why Imam Zainul Abidin would say, Inna deen Allah la yusabu bil uqul naqisat. that the religion of Allah cannot be understood by the deficient intellects, because there are many things in religion that are outside of the dome of aql. And it is not aql which is that entity to understand them. For example, some people, they would say that wudu is about cleanliness. I say to you all, if wudu is simply about cleanliness, go and shower in hand sanitizer, you'll be cleaner than when you do wudu. Even though you're cleaner than when you do wudu, can you go and pray in that state? No, you can't pray in that state. Or I'll give you another example. If you claim that wudu is simply about cleanliness, if you don't have water, what do? You do tayammum with dust. That arguably makes you dirtier. So you find that not everything can be understood via rational mechanism. We need to examine revelation as well. You know what the key difference between the method of modern science and the Quran is? The method of modern science is based on empiricism. Empiricism means that you observe, you experiment, and you come to a conclusion. This is what science is. Science is observation, experimentation, and coming to a conclusion. But when a Rasulullah is given wahi and revelation, Allah is not saying, "Oh Prophet, go and experiment, see if this ayat of the Quran is correct or not correct." No, Allah doesn't say that. That is why there are different sources of knowledge. And there is a hierarchy in these sources of knowledge. You know, there is an interesting verse of the Quran. And it is in Surah An-Nahl, in the 16th chapter of the Quran. And it says that Allah is the one, الَّذِي أَخْرَجَكُم مِّن بُطُونِ أُمَّهَاتِكُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ شَيْئًا. That when Allah brought you from the wombs of your mother, you didn't know anything. وَجَعَلَ لَكُمُ السَّمْعَ وَالْأَبْصَارَ وَالْأَفْئِدَةَ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَشْكُرُونَ. But when He brought you out and you didn't know anything, He didn't leave you helpless. He created for you your hearing and your vision, and He created for you your heart in order that you can thank Allah. You see, at one level, this ayat is mentioning that you have the 5 physical senses, and through these senses, you can come to an understanding of different things. But it also mentions that when you were jahil, when you knew nothing, God also gave you the heart. Now the question is that what is the role of the heart? And why is it in the modern world we do not see that the heart is a source of knowledge? When you look in the traditions of Ahlul Bayt, and you look in the traditional world, you find that knowledge is not just constricted to the 5 senses. There is a metaphysical element of knowledge. That is why Imam Sadiq would say, "Man amila bima alim kufiya bima lam ya'lam." That the one who acts upon the knowledge that they have, Allah will suffice them in what they don't know. In other words, there's one type of knowledge that you gain through the 5 senses. You act upon that knowledge. There's a hadith of the Imam. You act upon that hadith. But then there is a second type of knowledge which is a result of your actions. And that knowledge gives you ma'rifah and understanding. That's why when one companion of Imam Sadiq by the name of Unwan al-Basri, he comes to the Imam and he stands at the door of the Imam and he says, "I want to take from your knowledge." The Imam says to Unwan al-Basri, لَيْسَ الْعِلْمُ بِالتَّعَلُّمِ إِنَّمَا هُوَ نُورٌ يَقَعُ فِي قَلْبِ مَنْ يُرِيدُ اللَّهُ تَبَارَكَ وَتَعَالَى أَنْ يَهْدِيَهُ. The Imam says, "O Unwan, knowledge is not gained by learning, but knowledge is a light which Allah places in the hearts of the one whom He wants to guide." What does this tradition mean? Does this tradition mean that to study doesn't have a value? No, it doesn't mean that. But it shows that there is an element of tawfiq. There is a type of knowledge which is a noor, which is a guide in your life. So in all of these realities, the point is is that to take a strictly material approach that knowledge is only in the five senses is contradictory. Because I would say to those people who refer to themselves as the school of scientism, that they say that the only thing which can be confirmed is via the five senses, I would say to them, how can you confirm this statement through the five senses? If you say that the only form of knowledge which can be confirmed is through the five senses, then prove this sentence through the five senses. You can't do that. In that way, you are breaking your own principle. So you find that in the way that intellect has a role, we say in Islam, science has its domain, religion has its domain. And in that regard, there are many different aspects of religion, and each of them has a different limit to the use of intellect. For example, in the first domain, we have aqaid and belief. When it comes to aqaid and belief, we find that the Quran time and time again uses rational arguments. And if we are going to be a group who builds our belief in a strong manner, not just a manner where we are following the deen of our parents, we have to use our intellect. You know, for example, in the Quran, Allah says, لَوْ كَانَ فِيهِمَا آلِهَةٌ إِلَّا اللَّهُ لَفَسَدَتَا. That if upon this earth, in the heavens and the earth, there was a God besides Allah, there would be corruption upon this earth. Meaning that if there were multiple creators, you would not have a cohesive unit in nature. The Quran is using a rational argument over here. No further than that, when you look at the Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam, the Prophet Ibrahim in multiple occasions used his rationale to guide his people. When he saw that his people were worshipping the idols, what does Nabi Ibrahim do? Nabi Ibrahim finds a time that there is a festival. And when that festival it occurs, they leave their town, and that house where all of the idols were, Ibrahim, he goes into that house, he breaks all of the idols except for the largest idol. When they return, they see all of the broken idols. They say to Ibrahim, "Oh Ibrahim, what is this?" What does Ibrahim say to them? Nabi Ibrahim, he says that ask the largest idol, in kanu yantikun, if it is able to speak. And then the Quran, it says that after Ibrahim says this, فَرَجَعُوا إِلَىٰ أَنفُسِهِمْ, all of them, they returned to themselves. In other words, they began to use their intellect. That if we are not able to believe that this idol can break all of the other idols, then how can we take this idol as a creator and as a Lord? This is one example from the life of Ibrahim. Another example from the life of Ibrahim where he uses intellect to establish aqaid and belief is that it is stated that Ibrahim is with a group of people and he wants to prove the existence of God. First, the sun, it comes. And then the sun, it sets. Ibrahim says, Inni la uhibbul afilin. That which comes and goes cannot be a creator. Because a creator must always be present. The moon, it comes. Ibrahim says the same thing. A star, it comes. Ibrahim says the same thing. Another example from the Quran. A third example from the life of Ibrahim, where the Ibrahim, he uses rationale, is that Nimrud says to Ibrahim that, "Oh Ibrahim, you claim that there is no God but Allah, there is no creator, and that your God gives life and death. I also give life and death." Ibrahim says, "What do you mean?" Nimrud, he says that these are two people. I sentence this person to death. And this person, I allow him to live. In that manner, I give life and death. Ibrahim says, if you are a Lord, then bring the dead one back to life. So in that manner, the Quran is showing that when it comes to the realm of intellect, intellect is used to establish the existence of Allah. And intellect can be used to establish risalat and even imamat. It's stated very famously that one of the companions of Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq, salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi, one of the famous companions of Imam as-Sadiq was an individual by the name of Hisham ibn al-Hakam. And Hisham ibn al-Hakam was such an individual that some riwayat say that despite only being a young man whose beard has not come out, Imam as-Sadiq would stand up when Hisham ibn al-Hakam would walk into the room. Imagine you have a 14, 15-year-old over there, and you have a room with all of the great scholars, every individual of respect, but this 14-year-old walks in the room, and the grandson of the Prophet Muhammad is standing up out of that individual, for that individual. What was the greatness of Hisham ibn al-Hakam? One of the great aspects of this companion of the Imam is that he would use rationale to establish the tenets of Ahlul Bayt. It's stated one day an individual from Syria comes. When that individual from Syria, he comes to Medina, Imam as-Sadiq says that go and debate Hisham, then you can have a conversation with me. That man, he says to Hisham that you are only a young individual. Hisham says, you'll find my knowledge is enough for you. Hisham says, why have you come all the way from Syria? He says, I've come all the way from Syria to establish the position of the Quran and the Sunnah. Hisham ibn al-Hakam says very well. He says that when Allah created this world, did He create this world with a purpose or without a purpose? The man says He created it with a purpose, of course. Then Hisham says, how did Allah guide us to that purpose? The man replies by saying, with the Prophet Muhammad. The Prophet Muhammad told us what the purpose of our creation was via the Quran and his narrations. Hisham says that works in the time of Rasulullah. What about after the death of Rasulullah? That man says then it is the Quran and the Hadith of the Prophet. Hisham says, are the Quran and the Hadith of the Prophet enough to explain everything in the religion without conflict? The man, he stops at that moment. He begins to think. He says that if I say that the Quran and the Hadith are enough, then I've come all the way from Syria because we have a difference and a dispute. But if I say that the Quran and the Hadith are not enough, then I have a problem in my original position. You see that many of the companions of the Imams of Ahlul Bayt would use the intellect and the rationale. You know, even Ahlul Bayt themselves have many traditions where they would use aql to explain different realities. There's the famous hadith of Amir al-Mu'mineen, Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi. In that hadith, the Imam says that if I was given a chance to rule, lo jo'ilat liyal wisada, that I would judge the Christians by the Bible, and I would judge the Jews by the Torah, and I would judge the Muslims by the Quran, and everyone else who doesn't believe in a religion, I would judge them by what? I would judge them by the intellect and by the aql. And in reality, this is what Amir al-Mu'mineen he would do. You know, in the Battle of Siffin, amongst the famous individuals who were killed in the Battle of Siffin was Ammar ibn Yasir. And the killing of Ammar ibn Yasir, it posed a problem to those on the other side. Why? Because Rasulullah has a famous hadith where he says, Ammar, that my sorrow for Ammar taqtuluhu fi'atun baghiya, that an oppressive and a rebelling group is the one who is going to kill Ammar ibn Yasir. Now Ammar ibn Yasir on the day of Siffin is on the side of Amir al-Mu'mineen. On the other side, you have the side of Muawiyah. Everyone knows this hadith. You know how they tried to get around this hadith? They said that it is not us who killed Ammar. In reality, it is Ali who killed Ammar because he brought him to the battlefield. How did Amir al-Mu'mineen reply to these people? He didn't reply by saying that look at the text, look at the hadith, look at all of this. No. He replied by using aql and intellect. He says that if you claim that I am the killer of Ammar because I brought Ammar to the battlefield, then the killer of Hamza was Rasulullah. Because Rasulullah is the one who brought Hamza to the battlefield on the day of Uhud. So you see, intellect has a profound position in explaining the truths when it comes to aqaid. But we realize that when we look at our usul ad-din, there are certain things that even in aqaid, the intellect cannot understand. For example, if I told you, prove to me rationally the different stages of the hereafter, you won't be able to do it. Yes, aql can establish that if there is a God who is just, then there needs to be a hereafter where there is the accounting of mankind. But we cannot say that because there is aql, I am able to understand, I'll go into the grave and there will be two angels who come towards me. Then after that, there will be the period of barzakh. Then I'll be raised on the day of judgment. And there will be a sirat and a mizan and all of these different stages. Aql can't understand that. In one regard, even in aqaid, we are dependent upon the text because the text is from the domain of revelation. So at the first level in aqaid and belief, the intellect can establish God. It can establish prophethood. It can establish imamat. But there are certain details that are needed, and that comes from the text. Now we come to the second realm. The second realm is the role of intellect in Islamic law. And over here, we find that many individuals in the modern world are engaged in this debate. For example, they'll say that many of the ahkam about women, they are out of date. Women today are much more intelligent and free than women from 1400 years ago. So in that sense, Islamic law needs to be updated. Or there are certain aspects of Islamic law that need to be changed. How do we reply to this misconception? The first thing we say is that in Islamic law, the jurists, they say, yes, there is an element of Islamic law which is aql. When you look at our sources for deriving Islamic law, we say number one, there is Quran. Number two, there is hadith. Number three, there is ijma and consensus, and that consensus where the opinion of the imam is there. And number four, there is aql. You'll say that, what do you mean that aql is a source of Islamic law? I say, do you need a hadith to say zulm is haram? You don't need a hadith. Rationale tells you to oppress another individual is wrong, and based upon aql, because our rationale says this, then our aql tells us that dhulm is haram as well. But at the same time, on one side, this aspect is there. But at the second level, there are many aspects of Islamic law which are outside of the realm of aql. For example, there's a tradition from the imams where one individual, he comes to the imam and he says, "Oh imam, that explain to me the role of intellect in law." The imam says that when you do wudu and you wipe your feet, do you wipe the top of your foot or the bottom of your foot? They said that we wipe the top of our foot. The man says, the imam says, even though the bottom of your foot is dirtier, but in this case, we're wiping the top. In other words, when it comes to Islamic law, when we have the Quran and the Hadith over there, we submit to the nusus, we submit to the text, that in that realm there is no aql, that we have submitted to it. Yes, we can use our aql to establish whether the imam said this or not. For example, it's very famous that Sayyid al-Khu'i, in Mu'jam Rijal al-Hadith, we have certain hadith from the imams that say that Shahr Ramadan will always have 30 days. And Sayyid al-Khu'i rejects these narrations. Why? He says, al-aqlul qat'ul jami. In other words, rational people understand that months can have 29 or 30 days. There is nothing in creation that suggests that whenever Shahr Ramadan comes, that the moon of the first will only be seen after 28 or 29 days. This is about the realm of existence. So in that manner, he is using aql to reject this hadith. But at the same time, we also see other individuals who tried to expand the role of aql in Islamic law. It's very famous that one day an individual brings Abu Hanifa to Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi. Abu Hanifa would use a method in Islamic law which in logic we would call tamthil, and in fiqh we call qiyas or analogy. And you know what it states? It states that if two things are similar, then the shariat of Allah must also be like this. If A is like B, then the same applies to the shariat of Allah. One day, Abu Hanifa, he is introduced to Imam as-Sadiq. And that person says that meet Abu Hanifa, he is a very intelligent individual. The Imam looks at Abu Hanifa and he says, أَأَنْتَ الَّذِي تَقِيسُ الدِّينَ بِرَأْيِكَ? Are you the one who introduces analogies into this religion based on your own opinion? The Imam says, O Abu Hanifa, what is a greater sin in the eyes of God? To kill someone or to commit adultery? Abu Hanifa says to kill somebody is a greater sin. The Imam then says, O Abu Hanifa, answer this question. Why is it that when you kill someone, you only need 2 witnesses? But when somebody commits adultery, you need 4 witnesses. After that, the Imam says to Abu Hanifa, that what is greater, prayer or fasting? Abu Hanifa says, of course, prayer is greater. The Imam says, then why is it that when a woman is in a state of menstruation, she does not have to make up her prayers that are missed, but she has to make up those fasts which are missed? So the Imam, he says, O Abu Hanifa, do not introduce your own analogies based on your opinions into the deen. فَإِنَّ أَوَّلَ مَنْ قَاسَ الْإِبْلِيسِ, that the first person to do this form of qiyas was Iblis and Satan. When he said in front of Adam that, O Allah, you have created him from clay and you have created me from fire. So it goes to show that when it comes to the realm of Islamic law, even though there are certain realities such as zulm being haram, we can deduce through aql, the majority of Islamic law is dependent upon the text. So if in a question answer session somebody says, why is a dog najis? A dog is najis because the text from Ahlul Bayt says it's najis. Because the hadith, they tell us it's najis. That is the reason behind it. So this is the second level. Now the third level of this discussion, after we discuss Quran, religion and science, and we discuss the role of intellect and belief, and we discuss the role of intellect and law, is that can we use our aql and our intellect to establish a society? You see, this is a very important question. That when we are building our communities, what role does aql have when we engage with each other? And in this regard, the Imams have shown that aql even has a domain and a role over here. You know, there is a tradition of Imam Zainul Abidin, Ali ibn al-Hussein, salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi. In this tradition, the Imam says that do not befriend 5 types of people. And what this goes to show is that the Imam is telling us when you build your relationships with the people around you, use your intellect to determine whether this person is worthy of being in my presence, whether this person is positive for me. The Imam says that the first person that you do not befriend is a liar and a kadhab. Because that person is like a mirage. He may seem close to you, but in reality he is far from you. And he may seem far from you, but he is close from you. The Imam is giving an intellectual reason as to why you should not befriend a liar. Then the Imam says the second person you should not befriend is a fasiq, a person who doesn't have any moral values, because he will sell you out for something which is very small. He says the third person that you shouldn't befriend is a stingy individual, because that what you need the most, he won't give towards you. The fourth person that you should not befriend is a person who cuts the ties with his family, because that person is cursed in the book of Allah. In other words, if that person can't respect his father and his mother, how is that person going to respect you as a friend? So in this manner, the Imam, he gives 5 different groups of individuals that a person should not befriend, and he gives rational reasons as why you should not befriend them. So in that sense, even when you build a society, the role of the intellect is a profound role. And even on the day of Ashura, when Imam al-Hussein spoke, he would give rational arguments on the day of Ashura. For example, in one sermon, he says to the army of Umar bin Saad that, do you know the son of the daughter of a prophet who is alive right now besides me? He would say to them that, am I not the grandson of Rasulullah? He would say to them that if you doubt who I am, then go and ask Jabir ibn Abdullah al-Ansari who I am, and go and ask Sal ibn Abu Sa'd al-Sa'idi, go and ask Zayd ibn al-Arqam. And in this manner, the Imam would remind each of these individuals who he is. But this is that Imam who taught us that yes, intellect has a role, but the greatest quality of the ashab of Sayyid al-Shuhada is that they reach that maqam of taslim and submission. And the greatest exemplar of submitting to Ahlul Bayt, without a doubt, is Aba Fadl Abbas. That when Abbas, he reaches the Furat on the day of Ashura, this is that Abbas, he could have rationalized, he could have said that if I drink from this Furat, I'll have energy and I'll defend Hussein. But no, this is that Abbas who was at the maqam of taslim, at the maqam of ishq, that when he sees that water, he says, Ya nafsu min ba'dil Hussein huni, wa ba'dahu la kunti aw takuni, hada Husseinun waridul manuni, wa tashrabina baridil ma'ini. Aba Fadl Abbas says, O soul, O nafs, after Hussein, what is left for you? Neither were you nor will you be. You want to drink from this water while Hussein is drinking from the syrup of death. You see, if you want to describe Aba Fadl Abbas in one word, then that word is wafa and loyalty. This is that Abbas that on the day of Siffin, as Aba Fadl Abbas is fighting as a young man, the veil is on the face of Aba Fadl Abbas. And those who were on the opposite side, they didn't know who was fighting. Eventually, after the battle, Amir al-Mu'mineen says, O Abbas, unveil yourself. And when they saw Aba Fadl Abbas, they said, O Abbas, you are fighting while Hassan and Hussein are not? Aba Fadl Abbas, he says that those are the sons of Rasulullah. I am the son of Ali ibn Abi Talib. And then he says, those are the eyes and I am the hand. And it is the job of the hand to protect the eyes. I say, O Abbas, to protect the eyes, you have to have hands that are remaining. You know, Amir al-Mu'mineen, when each of his children were born, he would kiss their forehead. When Imam al-Hassan is born, he kisses the forehead of Imam al-Hassan. When Imam al-Hussein is born, he kisses the forehead of Imam al-Hussein. When Muhammad al-Hanafiya is born, he kisses the forehead of Muhammad al-Hanafiya. But when Aba Fadl Abbas was born, you know what Amir al-Mu'mineen he did? He kisses the right arm of Abbas. He kisses the left arm of Abbas. Baneen says, Ya Ali, why do you not kiss the forehead of Abbas? Is it because Abbas is the son of a slave like Baneen? Amir al-Mu'mineen says, Oh Baneen, it is not for that reason, but the reason that I kiss the arms of Abbas is that these are those arms which will be cut for my Hussein on the day of Ashura. You know, as the day of Ashura would go on, Ali Akbar would go to the battlefield, Abbas was waiting. Qasim would go to the battlefield, Abbas was waiting. On and Muhammad would go to the battlefield, Abbas was waiting. A point it comes where Abbas, he says, Oh my master, when will you give me ijaza and permission? And it is stated the Imam would say, Ya Abbas, anta sahibu liwai ya Abbas. Oh Abbas, you are the alamdar of my army, oh Abbas. Abbas, you are the flag bearer of my army, oh Abbas. At that moment, فَنَّذَرَ إِلَى يَمِينِهِ وَشِمَالِهِ. Abbas, he looks to the right, he looks to the left, he says, Oh master, what army is left that I am the flag bearer of that army? The Imam says, Oh Abbas, you are my supporter, go back, oh Abbas. Abbas says he is waiting for his opportunity to come. It is stated that the daughter of Imam al-Hussein, she goes to her chacha Abbas and she says, Oh our chacha, oh my uncle, we feel great thirst at this point. Aba Fadl Abbas, he says to the Imam, Oh my master, that if you're not giving me permission to fight, then at least let me bring water back towards the tents. It is stated that in one hand was the alam of Aba Fadl Abbas, and upon that alam was that water bag. Aba Fadl Abbas, he goes to the Furat and he fills the water into the bag from the Furat. And as Aba Fadl Abbas, then that moment it comes that Aba Fadl Abbas, he begins to return towards the tents. As Aba Fadl Abbas is returning towards the tents, they surround Abbas from all sides. They cut the right arm of Aba Fadl Abbas. Abbas, he says, Wallah in qata'tum yamini, inni uhami abadan an dini wa an imamin sadiq al-yaqini. Aba Fadl Abbas, he says, by Allah, if you cut my right arm, I will never stop to defend the grandson of Rasulullah, the one who is the rightful Imam. It is stated, Abbas, now that his arm is cut, he holds that flag in the left arm. But then at that point, they cut the left arm of Aba Fadl Abbas. Then after that, Hurmala, he picks up his bow and arrow. He fires that arrow into the eye of Aba Fadl Abbas. You know, there was one reciter in Karbala. A Khatib, a Zakir recited the Masaib that an arrow went into the eye of Abbas. That scholar who was there, he said, don't recite this Masaib. You don't know if this Masaib is authentic. That scholar that night, he says, I saw Abbas in my dream. And Abbas, he said to me that, why did you stop my reciter? That scholar, he says, oh my master, I didn't know if the Masaib was authentic. Aba Fadl Abbas, he he said to that individual that the musibah is authentic. An arrow went into my eye, but whenever something goes into your eye, your first reaction is to use your hands to take it out. At that moment, my arms were cut, so I would look to the right, I would look to the left. Eventually, I put my head down. I placed that arrow in between my knees, and as my knees held on to that arrow, I pulled that arrow. It's stated that one day, water had come into the shrine of Aba Fadl Abbas. And the scholar who would overlook that project was Sayyid Mahdi Bahar al-Ulum. As they were reconstructing the grave of Aba Fadl Abbas, a man, he comes to Sayyid Mahdi Bahar al-Ulum and he says, "Oh Sayyid, I have one question." That question is that we would hear that Abbas was a very tall individual. "Oh Sayyid, why is the grave of Abbas so small?" It's stated Sayyid Bahar al-Ulum, he takes off his amama and his turban and he says, "Oh man, Abbas is that shaheed that not only did they cut the neck and the arms of Abbas, they trampled over the body of Abbas until the body of Abbas was broken to pieces." You know who is Aba Fadl Abbas? It is stated that when this caravan it returns to Medina, the mother of Abbas was not in Karbala. The mother of Abbas, Ummul Baneen, was waiting in Medina. When Bashir announces his lines of poetry, "Ala ya ahlil yatrib, la muqama lakum biha, faqutila al-Husayn fa'admu imiraru." It is stated that Ummul Baneen, she comes to Bashir and she says, "Oh Bashir, that are you saying that Hussein has been killed?" Bashir says, "Yes, Hussein was killed." Ummul Baneen says, "How is it possible that my Abbas was there and Hussein was killed?" Bashir says, "Oh Bibi, first Abbas was killed, then Hussein was killed." Ummul Baneen says, "Oh Bashir, how did they kill my Abbas?" Bashir says that they struck Abbas with a sword and they killed him. Ummul Baneen says, "Oh Bashir, I don't believe you. How is it possible that Abbas couldn't stop a sword?" Bashir says, "Oh Ummul Baneen, they had cut the arms of Abbas." Ummul Baneen, she begins to cry. She says, "Oh Bashir, whenever somebody falls to the ground, they use their arms to break the fall. You are saying, Bashir, that the arms of my Abbas were cut. Tell me one thing. Was it the chest of Abbas, or was it the face of Abbas which hit the ground first?" ألا لعنة الله على القوم الظالمين. ماتم حسين.